All right. So I hope everyone is doing well. I saw you guys last week, so this isn't too much new, so that's good. Today I'm looking at the topic graphical displays of assessment, and I don't want to do that today, so I'm going to do something different. We're in week 2 of this Max boot camp, and it's been incredibly eye-opening in a lot of different ways, and I would like to try and bring some of those experiences to you guys because this is all really allowing me to see where some of our deficits in education, in special education, in diagnostician, where some of our deficits lie in our overall understanding of what assessment is, what assessment's for, and how we can use assessment in meaningful ways. And I've seen a couple of things with this group that were really interesting, and I kind of want to get your guys' thoughts and feedback on it, and we'll see where the conversation goes. So I'll give you a couple of probably anecdotes, and we'll just see what arises. So we're doing this, the structure of this professional development that we're doing is kind of morning has been lecture and some opportunities to work with the teachers, and then the afternoon has been the teachers working with the students and us giving feedback on whatever they are doing. And yesterday we had the teachers give a kind of cold case pre-test. All right, so it was stuff the students didn't know, they weren't supposed to know. We were going to jump in and did do the instruction on it today and then do the post-test from there. But how the teachers behaved during the pre-test was really telling to their relationship with assessment and their understanding of assessment. So we were going to be teaching some definitions of landforms, geysers, plains, canyons, whatever else it was. And we were going to be measuring whether or not they could identify the tax later on based on the definitions that they had learned. And so they were starting off with a pretest for the pictures of the landforms. And as they presented the pictures, they were like giving hints and, kind of trying to lead the kids to water to get the names of these pictures. And so, they had a picture of the Grand Canyon and the kids said Grand Canyon. And one of the teachers was like, that's the name of it, but what is it? I don't know. What is it? Grand Canyon. That's the name of it. And they went back and forth. And I was just like, she doesn't know what it is. Like, she thinks it's the Grand Canyon. She doesn't know it's the canyon. Just be okay with that and move on. And what I realized was that for so many teachers, any assessment is an evaluation. It's like an end game evaluation. And so it doesn't matter if it's pre-test or post-test, the teacher's goal in these situations is to get the kids to the answer. And that is obviously, I hope obviously, at the pre-test level is so antithetical to the function of a pre-test, which is to assess what the child, more importantly than does know, does not know, right? And I wanted to take this opportunity, I guess, to focus in on pre-assessments, on the various types of pre-assessments that we have, how we can use them, what we can learn for them, what types of decisions we can make from them, and how they should inform our instruction. So this is something that I know in the first class, I think we talked about why we do assessment, and we talked about the concept of the pretest, and all these labels of how the pretest can function were all there, but we didn't dive into it in a little bit more depth. And what I'm based on what I saw with these teachers, I think that that's worth diving into a little bit more. So like, where does the pretest leave us? How do we behave during a pretest? What do we get from it? And what do we do next with it? Okay, that's where I'm going for today. Sound good? All right, cool. So give me some different types of, and again, keeping in mind you guys are in myriad locations working with myriad assessments. Give me some different examples of things that we pretest or types of pretests that we can give. Who wants to go first?
Vocabulary.
Okay, vocabulary. So, good. I'm going to write these down, and then I'm going to come back to all of them. All right, so vocabulary is a thing that we can pretest. Awesome. And Cece, I want you to think about the context that you're thinking of for vocabulary, okay? So just hold that in your head. Who else?
For me, I use the unique learning system. So I have monthly pre-check points, and we do pre and post. So
monthly, Allison, how do you want to, how should I be looking at that? Like, is that unit based? Is that?
Yes. Yeah. So okay. Each month we have a different unit. And so there's one on content, one on reading, one on math.
All right, so we have monthly unit checks. Okay, good.
I hate to say this, but I think this might be the case in a number of places. I have worked at multiple locations and have seen this very same thing. Normally when people do pre-test, they are doing it for the purpose of SLT, sadly. So but that's like the purpose of it, is to get data for your SLT, like not for adjustment instruction, not to see where the kids are starting versus where they need to go. So two purposes: to see what the kids already know, so basically kind of what they can test out of, and then collecting data for your SLTs.
And when you're talking about SLTs, oftentimes those are, and correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a little while since I've helped develop that. It's been a couple of years since I've developed SLTs. But when I've seen those, it's oftentimes a percent of the class that gets to mastery.
They write the goals in so many different ways. So like it started off really strict on teachers. Like I've gone through the process of not having SLTs. I've seen SLTs be implemented, and then I see how they are now. So it's principals have a lot to do with the wording specifically. The district might say this group of people has to do their SLT on this type of thing, and then usually they'll say you have to have at least 80% correct or something like that. Like, so you might be in charge of administering STAR, and then you have to say that you might give the STAR the first time, and then this is their score, and then the second time. And then if you don't have STAR, then you'll have some type of pre-test to give, and then you have to give the same test again and that will be your SLT.
So I think the way that I've seen it relative to what you were saying is I have seen it two primary ways. One is where SLTs are based on individual student growth, and the others are based on overall class performance.
Right. And usually that'll be up to the school administrator. They'll
Yep.
say, or the district could say it's worded that way or this way.
Gotcha.
It's just, I think that could be some of the cause as to what's happening with those teachers there at Max. If they're only exposed to that type of test that it's written for SLTs, then like we know now that the pre-testers to adjust instruction to see how the students are learning, to see what we could do better. But before I started doing all of this, I didn't have, that was my only exposure to pre-test and the post-test situation.
All right, cool. So I have 2 notes on that that I'll come back to. Awesome. All right, what else? What about some of my SPED clinical guys? I'm looking at you guys. You know who you are.
Well, I know for instance, with the learner that I'm working with right now, I just did a screening for like observing responses. And so I'm going to put it in some programs with that learner and then do another post screening to see like after we've mastered these programs, has there been a significant change in those probes?
Good. So I'm going to categorize observing responses into a bigger context, and I'm going to call it behavioral deficits. And that's not the perfect category for it, but I think that gets what we're going for. Okay, good. So we have behavioral deficits. What else? Heather, I'm going to pick on you because you're the missing link to your expertise is the missing link to what everything in here. So when you think of a pretest, what is a type of pretest that you give with regularity? Yeah.
Like anything specific? Sorry, I got some talking going on in the background. I don't know.
It's okay. Doesn't have to be like for specific targets, but when you give a pretest, what is it that you are looking for?
To see if they have the skill and repertoire.
Exactly. So you're looking for skill deficits. So Rhiann's looking at behavioral deficits, and you're often looking at skill deficits. And when at the clinical level and the SPED level, when we talk about a skill deficit, we're talking about the name of an individual thing or the ability to do a specific thing, right? So when we go from monthly unit checks and SLTs all the way down to skill deficits, we're seeing these assessments for a wide array of behaviors, both academic and behavioral, that we may or may not be working with. We also have behavioral pretests in the education setting, not necessarily for deficits, but for too much behavior from the bad behavior side, right? FBAs and FAs and all that kind of stuff. So we can also be looking at behavioral deficits for decrease. So with this list, I think that the challenge with all of these, with most of these things, as I think we're kind of seeing, is they very naturally, when you look at vocabulary, and Cece, I'm glad you started off with that one, because that can kind of go some different ways, but they lend themselves for like the moment in time snapshot, right? The SLTs, the monthly unit checks in particular, those really, really lend themselves to detaching the assessment from the instruction and attaching it to a calendar. I do my SLT test at the beginning of the year and the end of the year. I do my monthly unit test when the curriculum guide says I do my monthly unit test. And it's what the thing that marches on during that time is the curriculum and the instruction, independent, kind of as you guys were alluding to, independent of where the learners are at, right? And that comes from the paradigm of grades and the paradigm of a final assessment being what percent of the material did you acquire? Not what percent of the material did you master? Right? Those are, I know the small semantic difference, but I can acquire 70% of the material and not have mastered any of it. Right? If I have 10 addition and subtraction problems, I can get a 70% on those. And then in that case, I, the teacher, was like, oh boy, these were all kind of the same. Do you not know your facts? Did you make silly mistakes? Do you not know how to subtract? Do you not know how to add? Like, why did you miss those other three? Right? But if you teach to mastery, maybe it took me 3 days longer to get there, but you're going to get 100%. Right? So with each of these, you know, vocabulary, monthly unit checks, SLTs, behavioral deficits, skill deficits, what are some advantages and disadvantages of both? And let's assume that we can't really, and Cece, I'm about to come back to you for the vocabulary, but let's assume we can't change the structure of any of these, because there are advantages and disadvantages for both. How can we use, how can we emphasize the advantages and minimize the disadvantages of each of these? All right, so that's the question today. So Cece, when you're talking about vocab assessments, what context are you thinking of there?
Within, of course, ELA, or so in use match the term, the vocabulary term with the definition, or fill in the blank with vocabulary, or present vocabulary words to students to determine who may know the definition or who may not know the definition of particular vocabulary words.
Okay, so you're thinking of it in terms of like vocabulary in the context of the English language,
yes,
ELA, versus vocabulary as attached to reading comprehension.
Well, additionally, also Dr. Shaman comprehension.
Yeah. Okay, and I think that those are important discriminations, though, because to me, vocabulary as a pretest for reading comprehension is like, that's one of the most beneficial assessments you can give, because they are so strongly tied together. And that the vocabulary assessment almost becomes your pre assessment, right? I give the vocabulary test, you bomb the vocabulary test, I don't move to reading comprehension. I teach the vocabulary related to the reading comprehension. Then I assess the reading comprehension. Because if I give the vocabulary and you don't have it, and then I give the reading comprehension assessment and you don't have it, I don't know if you're not comprehending what you're reading, or if you just don't know the vocabulary, and that prevents you from comprehending it. All right, cool. So just about each of you came up with an example here. But what I want you to do, I want you to take a few minutes. So I'm going to do this, ELA vocabulary, monthly, I'm going to say curriculum unit checks, SLTs, however you want to define them, behavioral deficits, and skill deficits. So these are all different types of assessments that are used, or pre-assessments in particular that are used. I want you to take 5 minutes and write down a benefit to each of these and a problem with each of these. Okay? Sound good? All right, cool.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Rhea.
So a problem with the assessment in general?
Not the specific assessment. So don't think of like observing responses specifically, but like when assessing behavioral deficits, what is a problem conceptually with that as a pretest? Okay. All right, cool. So I'm going to pause the recording. So let's kind of take these one by one. And I actually really like the SLT one. So let's start there. Who has a benefit, or let's do good things first about the concept of SLTs, and provide a little bit of information about how you were thinking about them, since there are different variations on how we can use SLTs. So what are good about using SLTs as pre-tests?
It's a good baseline to see where your students are.
Okay.
So that you can use that to guide instruction, know which units to spend more time on. I'm thinking I was in a math class this past year. And so, okay, I might need to spend more time on these lessons, but seems like the kids have this stuff, and grouping students.
Okay. So you get like a big kind of bird's eye view of both an individual and a class relative to what you're going to be doing over the long haul. Yeah? Okay, cool, awesome. I agree. Who else?
And I guess when the assessment is available to you too, because now I'm thinking about it, and a lot of, like this past year, was on the computer, so the teachers didn't really know, unless they were looking and seeing what they were tested on.
Yeah.
Which items.
I think it's together. I think it's fair. I don't know what that was. I think it's fair to say like pre-COVID normal times, especially as we exit COVID and go back to normal times. So yeah, when COVID threw all sorts of issues into not just assessment, but how assessment informs instruction. I've heard that time and time and time again from any number of teachers. Good. Selena, what about you? It was yours. Do you have any benefits to SLTs as pre-assessment?
I don't know. I'm just feeling like I have a bad attitude as far as that goes.
No. But I think that it's important because you're going to be, SLTs aren't going away.
Right.
So
like I hadn't had any experience where you say you gave the pretest, like there was you looked back at it, you saw what the question was, tried to figure out why they did do so well or why they didn't do so well on it. You basically just got the score, like the overall percentage, and then you had to try and make it be much, much better the next time they took the test, and that was about it. I think just the culture around the pretest as far as SLTs goes is just not built around what we're looking for, I guess. Like the culture is basically, and I'm not trying to be negative, but it's to test the teacher, like to see how well the teacher taught, not how well the student learned. And that's a huge fundamental difference to me.
I'm going to challenge you a little bit. Why is that such a bad thing?
Because it's the culture. Like if the teachers felt that it was not a test for them, if they felt that they were doing it to measure the knowledge and the progress of the student, then they wouldn't feel it's so dangerous that you could lose your job over low SLT scores when it comes time to cut somebody. I was cut because of my SLTs, because I followed this isn't group therapy, but I was one of the people that got cut due to SLTs because I followed directions and I did what they said to do. And I was one of the people who got cut. So maybe that's why I'm a little salty when
No,
it comes to that department.
That's totally fair. And I think that you're honing in on, first of all, the environment that an SLT, the concept of SLTs came out of, which is like the No Child Left Behind culture. And that is a toxic culture. And we know that that was not effective. And there are still some vestiges of No Child Left Behind that got moved into Race to the Top, that got moved into Common Core, that got moved in to the compass standards and teacher evaluation that are not necessarily good. And what I would encourage you to think of is, if the culture were different, could the SLT be more useful?
That's what I think is the missing component, is the culture behind the SLTs, and that even observations too, a lot of new teachers and things like the whole process of compass evaluations is not, to me, there's not a positive atmosphere around the whole entire thing. And that's one thing that I think that I try my hardest as a district leader to push the idea that when I observe in classrooms, that I'm not there to make you feel bad or that you're inadequate or that you did something right or wrong. Because a lot of people are scared to have a district person come in and observe them. But when, I really try really hard to not have that image. I don't give evaluations and things. I'm just there for suggestions. But I do think we need to do a better job of building the culture around that. It's to help students learn, and it's to help us to be better teachers, and not just to say, like, how well did you do as a teacher, and then like you get a punishment for it.
Right.
If it wasn't, like, it's punitive instead of like to see how well the students learn.
And I think that's the piece that I was getting at, and you said it, like it is to help learn how the students learn, but also for how we can be better teachers. But without the, and now you don't have a job component, right? What I was thinking, the thing that I wrote down is, and I think this is totally accurate to what I started off with talking at Max, like, look, the higher, the more your students know on the pre-test, the less growth you need to meet your SLTs, right? Like, if you got all your students at a 75% on your pre-test, you're almost there. Whatever your SLT is, there's just not a whole lot of room for growth. So you as a teacher don't have to teach as much to get them there. So when you're saying you're playing by the rules, you're following the rules, you're getting a true and accurate assessment, whereas some other teachers might be like, right? Let's raise the floor so that we don't have as far to go. All right, good. So let's assume a positive environment around concepts of SLTs. How can we use those data in meaningful ways? Now, what the information that you're given is obviously a variable that we don't necessarily control. So if you're just given a score, that's not helpful. And there's no way that can be helpful. However, if you are given a breakdown, or you are shown what how your students actually performed on things, like when I was given, they weren't SLTs, but when we were given beginning of the year assessments, I mean, we had the test. It was not electronic, so we administered the thing, we scored the thing, we saw how it all went. And as Allison said, we use that for grouping, we use that for identification, at least a first level identification of skill deficits. So we were able to do a lot with that, with those tests. But how can you use those in meaningful ways, given appropriate information. Or did I just give an exhaustive list? Can it be done? Allison, you seem like you had a little bit more positive experience, like, or you had some positive thoughts. What, or you're just like reaching for the stars?
Right. So like I did have those positive thoughts, and now I'm thinking that's not how it was. All we got was a score. Yeah.
Yeah. So
It's
that's
just like
obviously
these kids made benchmark, and these are below average, and these are above average. So that's
right. So what? Like,
right.
so what? And yeah, if you're just given a score, that totally neuters your ability to do anything with it. Like a number is not meaningful. A number tied to something can be very meaningful. Yeah. Okay, cool. What about monthly unit tests, checks, curriculum-based assessments? That type of thing. What are some, so you know, whether it's a mark in time on the pacing guide, you know, it's February 1st, this is the test we give on February 1st, or if it is a even a mastery based unit test, like this is unit 6, we give the test at the beginning of unit 6. What are some advantages or disadvantages of those?
I don't really participate in any of that, but I would say maybe a disadvantage would be, with it being a monthly thing, it's almost too late, you know, like, because we kind of do like a moment by moment and figure out, okay, is this working? Is this not working? I feel like when you wait a month, it's like we've wasted a whole month if this kid doesn't know what's going on or what's happening in, you know, with this test. And it's like, what do you do now? Like, we got to continue on to the next thing that's on the list, and we can't go back and try to reteach this because it still has to progress. But I mean, that
And
just seems like a really long time.
so I'm making a little bit of an assumption, but I feel like you're saying that kind of in the context of a post test. Like, we've taught the thing, now it's the end of the month, now we give the test again. Oh crap, they don't know it, and we can't go back. Take that same concept and apply it to the pre-test. You give it, they're missing the prerequisite skills, and you can't go back because you haven't taught to mastery, right? So now there's an issue on both ends. Yeah? Good. I think that's a huge issue, a huge possible concern.
And I wrote that down for skill deficit ones. It's like, how do we bridge the gap when your peers are moving here and then you figure out where they're missing, but how do you go back and teach those skills that they're missing, or do you push them along with their peers, which I think is usually what
100% what is typically done. Good. What else? What are some good things about pre-tests, unit-based pre-tests, curriculum-based pre-tests? What are some good things about those?
I think just in an ideal situation, like a positive thing about a pre-test and a post-test would be, it could be motivational for a student and their families, like to see where they started versus where they're going. But I just know a lot of the students that we work with, like for me, it doesn't always help me to identify those barriers for the student. So, but you can still use them to motivate the student with behavioral interventions along with academic interventions.
Good. So, you know, I sit here and I trash talk grades all the time, but there's definitely a motivational component for some kids for grades, and seeing the absence of a percent on a pretest can set the motivational conditions for a lot of kids to get that percentage on a post test. If I get, 35% accuracy on a pretest and I'm a smart little kid, then I want to get 100%. I got a long way to go. I didn't know it. You showed me I didn't know it. Good on you. Now teach it to me so I can learn it, so I can perform. And then we're going to go and we're off and running. Good. What else? What about from a skill deficit perspective? How well or not well can or do unit tests address skill deficit concepts? Go ahead, Cece.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I think their pretests are good because you can also maybe group students according to skill level and ability. And then the content that you're teaching is the same, but yet you're accommodating and you're scaffolding to students who would need the accommodations, to help bring mastery. But also, I think that we as teachers, when we give pretest or the pretests are provided from what we expect or we think what our students know or understand. So I think there's an element of that we have to take a relook at. So if I have 8th grade students, and in fact, I had the conversation with my administrator, the 8th grade students that I taught, many of them were not on 8th grade level math or 8th grade level ELA. So, and the assessment that's provided to them is an 8th grade assessment or a pretest. So it's not going to be functional or effective or meaningful to our students. And then my other thought I had with the monthly curriculum unit checks, I actually think that is a good idea, provided that you've been preparing, that there's preparation, and that students have been, or that we're teaching, I'm saying myself in all of this, that we're teaching to content and to standard, so that, and we're doing formative assessments, mini assessments, I guess, along the way, to help boost mastery on the monthly curriculum unit checks.
Good. No, so you said a lot there, so let's unpack that a little bit. And I think that you hit the nail on the head in terms of some of the value of a monthly unit check. And when you're talking a larger context, that like beginning of the year grade level check, to the degree that you have the ability to modify groups, right? It absolutely could be that the children who had skill deficits in Unit 5 are strong in Unit 6 and vice versa. And you may need to rearrange some groups. So you don't want to necessarily have static grouping throughout, right? You want the ability to move kids around, to group kids differently. I remember when, so I'd have 3 groups in my class, and there was always this little kind of push and pull, but partway through the year, I'd get a couple kids who were in my middle level group for most of the year, who'd be ready to make the jump up to the higher group and move at a little bit faster rate and do some different activities. And they had to get used to things, and the kids had to, scooch over on the carpet a little bit further to make room. But the ability to regroup kids as not just skill deficit adjusts, but rate of learning adjusts. How many of you have had a kid at clinical or otherwise who at one point in time is learning at a particular rate, and then all of a sudden something clicks, super not behavioral way of saying it, and all of a sudden they're moving at a much faster rate, and they can learn in different ways now, right? And those kids can't be stuck with where they're at, right? Conversely, you have kids that hit walls and need to drop back a little bit. And, if I give an 8th grade pretest in your situation, And the 8th grade test is the end of 8th grade material that I know that they don't even have the prerequisites to start. I really need to give the 7th grade test and maybe the 6th grade test to find out what skills need to be scaffolded in to my instruction. But I also have to have the ability and the support to teach those skills, right? And that's often sometimes what's missing. You know, you're given 30 minutes twice a week, 45 minutes 3 times a week to do your pull-out intervention to address the 6th and 7th grade skills that are missing. The rest of the time, you're just working on 8th grade skills that aren't appropriate for the kid. Like, it should be the other way around. Like, put them in a 7th grade class and pull them out to do some 8th grade material for the stuff that they can have access to. But, sorry. Oh, excuse me. It obviously doesn't work that way. Like, we teach to the calendar, and the monthly checks kind of hopefully confirm that, if anything, the kids still don't know what they don't know. You know, that's the problem there. Good. What about kind of these? I want to put the ELA, the vocabulary type test or assessment, in with the skill deficits, right? Because that's really what we're looking for here as a pretest of what do we know or what don't we know as we enter into a unit specifically, much at a more minute level. And when I think of skill deficits, there are two categories of skill deficit or types of skill deficits that I work with. So I think that there are conceptual skill deficits, and there are specific skill deficits. So what do I mean by that? And how am I thinking about that? The best example of this that I can give is the spelling tests that we used. We used a curriculum called Words Their Way. It's okay, not great. Didn't love the instructional activities, but I loved their scope and sequence. So what they did is their pretest was, and I think I have it. I should pull it up or I'll send it out to you guys. It was 25 words. And the words got harder as they went, obviously. But so the first word was like bed, and the second word was cat, and the third word was float, and the fourth word was let's not end with T with everything, bead, and it scaled up from there. And what it was looking for was, for each word, you were assessing different concepts. Initial consonant, ending consonant, initial or middle short vowel, long vowel patterns, digraphs, and it went on and on and on from there. Medial digraphs, ending digraph, like however it needed to. And so a kid could get 5 of 25 words right, but they would get 22 of 78 word parts right. So it wasn't just like an SLT type thing where it's like you got 5%, you got 10%, right? It was, here are the whole words that you got right, because that is important, but here are the word parts that you got right. And now when I go to teach, I'm not focusing on specific words. I'm focusing on the initial sounds. You got those, I don't have to teach those. You have ending sounds. You got those, I don't have to teach those. You don't have Val-Val patterns versus CVCE patterns. So I do need to teach those. So that's the concept level skill deficit. Then I get to the specific skill deficit where I'm going to teach specific words or use specific words for my instruction. And I want to make sure you don't know the words that I'm about to teach you. So I assess those specific words. Spell feet, spell tape, spell this, spell that, spell the next thing. And any words that you know, I'm not going to use as assessment words. I might still use them as instructional words, but I'm not going to use those assessment words to evaluate whether or not you acquired the concept that I'm teaching here. Okay, so when it comes to skill deficits, we have this concept skill deficit and we have the specific skill deficit. And I think that there are different uses and beneficial uses to each of those. All right. So now that I've given you that 10 minutes, what are some pros and cons that you guys are thinking of to skill deficit type assessments? What are some pros? I know I just gave you a bunch of answers, but tell me your own.
Like some pros, I guess you could use that to actually see what skills. So when I think of a skill deficit, like I think of the child can't do something or something that they cannot do. So I guess it would be when you're given the assessment, you want to see what they can and cannot do and try to teach them to meet that certain criteria, where I think it would be hard to, because like, I don't think you could administer a skill assessment like that to a whole class. Like it would need to be done small group, individually. Because like, I don't think that it would still be a skill assessment if it was multiple choice, like pick A, B, or C, because they might guess. And then I wouldn't say that that was necessarily a skill.
Absolutely. So you're looking for true measures of the behavior, not byproducts somehow. You want to see, can you do the thing, right? Excellent. And yeah, I oftentimes did, especially the specific skill deficits in those small groups once we're ready to actually prepare for our instruction. Some of those concept skill deficit assessments, like using the words their way one, there was a lower list and an upper list. And I would give the lower list to everyone in the class. And I would say like, I would give it to everyone in the class. I would score that. And then I might pull, the third of the class that did pretty well on that. And I would give the upper list. And then I would be monitoring them as they go. And once I see incorrect, and they're just, making up letters all the way throughout, then I stop, I cut it off. So I can use that to help inform me in very, very specific ways, narrowing down to what's appropriate. Good. What else? Is there anything wrong or bad with skill deficit assessments?
I think that maybe this is not just specifically for skill deficits, but just overall, all the list that we have on the right-hand side. I would say that one of the biggest problems with assessments is just the individual delivering it. So like the individual is not calibrated, for example, like the teacher, and that really skews a lot of the data. I mean, right now sitting like on the leadership team at my school, just reviewing all of the, like assessment data, like data that we've collected throughout the year, a lot of that data is unfortunately skewed, and a lot has to do with the people delivering the assessments. And so I think that holds true to all of these for ELA, monthly curriculum, Unitech, SLTs, everything that we've listed here.
And that's why we started this conversation, right? Because I watched 6 teachers out of the 12 that were there delivered the same assessment, and they delivered it in 6 different ways. And I think that absolutely gets to the core of why this is so important. I think that they delivered them in such different ways because kind of what each of these conversations have led us to is that they've all viewed assessment for different purposes. When we have a singular goal for especially pre-test, which is find out what the student doesn't know, so it can inform my instruction, so I can teach the student, then it's just, this is what I need to assess you on. Do you know it? Do you know it? Do you know it? Do you know it? Now, we do have to make sure that we are controlling for motivation, controlling for effort. You get that many responses in a row that are hard, that a child doesn't know and they shut down. We got to be able to get them through that. And that really is where teacher training and the ability to motivate comes in. But you're not pulling the kid along. You're not feeding them the answers. That's not the purpose of that assessment. So we have to make sure that at the end of the day, we have some topographical assessments that we have to give. We have to give that SLT. We have to give this. We have to give that. We have to make sure that we have functional assessments in there as well. Now, in our clinical settings, what we're probably missing is a little bit more control over the larger scale assessment, right? We lose the ability, even when we use a criterion reference assessment that we're comfortable with, we lose the ability to have that larger scale snapshot of what's going on. And in the insurance context, that's why they ask for the Vineland. That's why they ask for the ADOS. That's why they ask for the norm referenced assessment. One, they don't understand criterion reference assessments, but they need something that's detached. They feel that they need something that's detached from the specific skills that we are teaching. Good, bad, and different, we as special educators and as clinicians need to have the ability to understand those norm reference assessments. And how can we obviously not teach to those assessments, but make sure that we are addressing behaviors that are going to show up there in meaningful ways for our kids, you know? All right. I liked that. That was good. I really liked that. Any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? Allison, you good to meet?
Yes.
Okay. Isaac, I was going to send you an email, but I'll just ask you now. Are you good to meet tomorrow?
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
I'm free. What's tomorrow? Wednesday? Yeah. Anytime after, I would say 2 o'clock.
Perfect.
Or, yeah.
Okay.
Whatever. Anytime after 2.
All right. I'll shoot you an email and we'll figure it out. Okay. All right. Sounds good. Have a good one, guys.